It was a major change in postal codes, to say the least. One day on pilgrimage in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, another day in the deserts of Tucson, Arizona. Such were the last 12 months of Shahram Amiri, former Iranian nuclear scientist, now American collaborator against Iran's nuclear ambitions, or something else. Former CIA analyst Raymond McGovern here to join us. If you can just kind of give us the background of this story. I mean, one day he's in Iran, the next day he's here in the United States. There's a lot of, I guess, a big gap to fill at that point.
Several thousand miles at
right.
least. Yeah.
Several thousand miles, to say the least.
Well, there are two stories here, that he was kidnapped and that he's living happily now in Arizona. They're not necessarily contradictory. In other words, in my brief years in government service, I was always predisposed to believe the American version of things. But now we know that the CIA does kidnap people. 23 officers were convicted in Italy for doing precisely that. And so it's really a matter of who you want to believe on this one. But it's not necessary to believe either, because if he was in Saudi Arabia, well, that's fertile territory for getting picked up. And if he's living in Arizona now, having sold his soul to the new guys, then he's living very comfortably. So it's quite possible that both have a grain of truth.
Before you continue on with the two not necessarily conflicting stories, I want to allude to what you may be talking about. There were video transmissions made allegedly by this Shahram Amiri, one saying where he's happy in Arizona, everything is great. Another one saying, no, I was tortured. Is that the gist of what you're getting to?
Those are two of the contradictory things. And of course, they were the two released just yesterday, I suppose it was, within 1 hour of each other. One of them from the Iranians saying that he was tortured, the other saying, I'm living happily forever after in Arizona. So, you know, this just really betokens the main problem, and that is that the U.S. government thinks it necessary to take outlandish measures to find out what's going on in the Iranian nuclear program. The U.S. estimate, the intelligence estimate, agreed to unanimously by 16 agencies in the fall of 2007, said that Iran had stopped working on the nuclear warhead part of its program. When? In the fall of 2003. 4 years before. Now, nothing has changed that estimate. Nothing has changed that. And this latest deal that Turkey and Brazil have worked out, where half of the low-enriched uranium that Iran has will be shipped out of country to Turkey in the first instance. Well, you know, if I were an Israeli and I were an American, and I'm pretending to be very concerned about Iran reprocessing this stuff to a higher degree to make a weapon, I would say, wow, that's great. That lessens the chance by about 50%, you know? Instead, they're out for sanctions. They're out for worse than sanctions. And that betokens a overweening desire, not out of fear for a nuclear weapon, but out of a determination to cause what we now call regime change, which in my day was called overthrowing governments, namely the government of the mullahs and Ahmadinejad.
Now, you used the term outlandish measures, but not necessarily far-fetched measures when it comes to the United States government in terms of how they go ahead and deal with other governments and maybe some people from other governments, particularly nuclear scientists.
Not anymore. It used to be different. I mean, even the CIA used to conduct itself according to tradecraft, which would not let 23 operatives charge things to their own personal credit cards in the Italian hotels and lead themselves astray out in eastern Afghanistan, so 7 of them got killed. I mean, there's a lack of professionalism, there's a lack of tradecraft, and yet they go about bumbling along.
See, most Americans I would imagine, don't believe that the United States government engages in actions such as kidnapping. Do you have a comment about that?
Well, that's very simply explained. Most of the Americans look at what we call mainstream media, what I call fawning corporate media, since these channels and these websites and so forth are controlled by the corporations, and they think they're getting informed. Now, if you spend an evening watching Fox News, you're not getting informed. The good news is that you have the web, you have the internet, and not enough people are aware just yet that if they want the real news, they need to do it there. Right. The Washington Post used to have an expression, if you don't get it, you don't get it. Well, now, if you get the Washington Post, you certainly don't get it. Okay.
Now, you said earlier that this isn't necessarily the two video transmissions put out by this nuclear scientist, that they're not necessarily contradictory.
Not completely.
Not completely contradictory. So, is this I mean, first of all, the question is he really here in the United States? Secondly, is he happy or is he miserable?
Well, if he's been kidnapped, he had some difficult choices to make, okay? You just put yourself in his position. Do you want to be happy? Well, one way to be happy is to cooperate with the new masters, okay? And in return for which, you get a pretty happy life in a nice little state of Arizona. They don't like Hispanics very much there, but maybe they like Iranian nuclear scientists. I suppose they do, because there are big nuclear-related facilities in the Southwest. So it's not, you know, it's not all that hard to think that, and I don't know this gentleman, but if he's typical of most people who either defect or allow themselves to be kidnapped or do get kidnapped, their choices are very, very difficult. I don't know where his family is, for example. I don't know anything about that.
Now, you are a former CIA analyst, Mr. McGovern.
Yeah.
What is in store for Shahram Amiri for the months to come, for the years to come here? Well,
if past precedent holds, he'll be given a false, what do they call it, false legend, okay? They'll give him a new name, give him some protection, some very close protection, and after 5, 6 years, he'll be blending in nicely, and maybe he'll then think it possible to redefect and go back to Iran and tell the rest of the folks what he learned about the U.S. nuclear program.
So, and because I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, I just want to make clear that your belief is that he was kidnapped from the streets of Medina, that he was brought here, and that he was tortured by the CIA, and that he is imprisoned by the CIA beyond his own will.
Well,
and cooperating maybe beyond his own will.
My guess is that that's the case. Now, this goes against, 70 years of believing my government instinctively, but the last 10 years have abolished that, okay? Whether he was tortured or not, I kind of doubt that, I just don't have any evidence that they would do that.
Why do you doubt that? I mean, because we've heard of instances involving other people from other countries and U.S. intelligence officers where torture was mentioned, and there seems to be a lot of evidence that torture was in place. So why do you doubt it at this incident?
Well, that's very simple. There were distinct purposes against the former torture. You wanted people to confess to knowing that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, or that there were ties between al-Qaeda and Iraq. And wow, they got people to do that under torture, and the President of the United States repeated these statements made under torture. Now, with respect to an Iranian scientist, he's not going to tell them about ties between al-Qaeda and Iraq, or even bad things that Iran has done. So there would be no reason to torture him. As a matter of fact, it would be completely counterproductive in his case if indeed they have him, and if indeed they wanted him to cooperate fully.
Okay. But the bottom line is this guy probably wants to get out of the United States, wants to leave and no longer be a part of this?
It all depends on the person, It depends on his political proclivities. It depends on how he looks at his future professionally, and whether he has family back there. I just don't know all those things. But these are very personal decisions, and I kind of, I think we need to be really careful not to be too hard on this guy before we find out what all the facts are.
Not only am I not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm also the master of stupid questions. So the stupid question I'm going to ask you is this. Given the fact that this guy is an Iranian nuclear scientist, how valuable and what kind of information could he possibly have for the CIA?
Well, I don't know for sure, but depending on how deeply ensconced he was in their program, he either knows that they are working on a nuclear weapon or they're not. Now, if he gives credible information that they are working on a nuclear weapon, you can bet that the Washington Post, the New York Times will be full of that next Sunday, okay? If they're not, they won't say anything, just like Brer Rabbit, don't say nothing, okay? So the other point I'll just make is that we know quite enough about Iran's nuclear program. UN inspectors are crawling all over Iran. It's not like they can break out like this. They would have to throw out the UN inspectors first. So people should relax a little bit, particularly since Iran has agreed now to ship half of its low-enriched uranium out of the country. And so I would just come back to that thought, that it is not an Iranian weapon that Israel is concerned about, nor the U.S. What they're concerned about is causing regime change. They hope to do that by sanctions, and failing that, military action. We have to be careful of that because there is a rogue, unpredictable, nuclear-armed regime in the Middle East now, and it's not Iran. It's Israel. Right. Unpredictable, a little fanatic, and what they did last weekend is proof positive that we have to be really afraid of what they might do next.
Well, Raymond McGovern, former CIA analyst, thank you for tying it all up together and connecting the dots. And I feel as if this is just the beginning. We still have a lot more to go beyond this, and the story will just continue on and on from here. We'll see how it all turns out.